Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Great British Dig live Q&A with an off and on-screen team. This week we were in the beautiful Strelley Hall, so of course we had to get none other than Dr James Wright to come and join us. Woo!
Hi.
So some of you may recognise James because he has been on some of our other YouTube lives, as well as a Archaeologist in Quarantine episode where we were looking at 15th century castles. Was it, James?
We looked at brick castles. We had a nice long chat about brick castles.
Yes, it was very insightful. I did enjoy it, believe it or not. I did really enjoy it. It went on longer than it was supposed to. I think it was like an hour and a half because we just could not stop talking. It was so cool. Anyway, I'll link that video in the description below so you can check it out. Trust me, it's fun. And actually, it's kind of connected to this episode. So I think we'll do a quick introduction to everyone, just in case it's your first time watching the live stream. Hello, my name is Natasha Bilson. I'm one of the co-presenters of the Great British Dig, and I have a background in commercial field archaeology. And I'll introduce you to our next co-presenter, John Henry. Hello.
Hello. I'm John Henry. I'm a presenter on the show. My phone keeps going off. Yeah, I wrote a book called The Search, bestseller, out now. That's it.
In paperback and hardback, available across the world.
Paperback in December, actually.
Oh, is it?
Out in America, England, right now, in hardback. I don't have a copy here. I normally do. Normally they're like in my pockets. Hold on.
It's like a massive poster as well somewhere, which is quite impressive, to be fair. That poster is cool.
Always got one at hand.
No, it's a great book. I've only read a little bit.
Yeah, you haven't read it. I don't know why you're.
I tried. Okay, I tried. It's great.
But Hugh Dennis likes it. You know, I would read his quote, but I don't have that to hand. But you know, lovely quote.
Okay, and then we'll go over to Marcus.
Hi, I'm Marcus. I do the 3D stuff on the show. Yeah, basically trying to make sense of all of your bits and pieces and visualizing the interpretations.
I think the audience can tell we've been doing this weekly now. I think it's our fourth or fifth one. So yeah, Marcus does amazing reconstruction works, not just bits. He does really cool stuff, and you do get to see bits. You only get to see like not even a minute, really, do you? 30 seconds worth sometimes.
Oh yeah, well yeah, I think it's only like 30 seconds is a long time in TV.
That's true. That's true.
30 seconds, that could be hundreds of hours of rendering.
Well, it is, isn't it?
Yeah, especially with all the tiny little tweaks and edits.
Mm-hmm. And Chris.
Hi, I'm Chris. I'm the archaeological consultant for the show, so I work behind the scenes really on setting up the Great British Dig and designing the archaeology that we do on the show, that kind of thing.
Amazing. And last but not least, James.
Oh, hi. I'm James Wright. I'm a consultant archaeologist, and the Strelley Hall episode that went out last week was based on some of my research and an excavation report that I put out in the 2000s. So it was an opportunity to revisit and also have my work tested, which was kind of daunting. Did I get it right the first time round? Was it all going to be a horrible mistake to bring you all there to film it? And it turned out not to be the case. And I think I really enjoyed watching it. I don't normally enjoy watching myself back on TV at all. So hopefully everybody that watched it will also have found it both entertaining and informative.
That's quite good. We got your seal of approval considering it is based on your research. So sweet. Good to know. Well done, Chris. Well done, Strawberry Blood. And us, yeah. So actually, in terms of the site itself, anyone who's not seen the whole episode, could we have a quick recap of the Archaeology James? And then Chris, let's go into maybe why we thought it was a good one to choose for the Great British Dig. Yeah.
So in 2006, the landowner was involved in digging some foundations for what was going to be a garden room, which is sort of like a conservatory, but with a proper roof on it. Sort of, I suppose, like a big summer house, brick-built summer house. And he couldn't find anything solid to build off. The bedrock outcrops quite close underneath the surface of Strelley Hall, and he knew that, but he kept digging down, couldn't find bedrock at all, and that was a bit of a conundrum for him. But what he did find was quite a lot of stonework, and he did the right thing. He called up the archaeology departments at the local council, and I was sent out to go and have a look at it. And it's always been known that there's been a potential medieval context to Strelley Hall. There's the tower, which Hugh and I filmed in, where we were able to walk into a room called the castle room, which has big thick walls, vaulted ceiling, it's got a basement beneath. That was known about, and it had always been thought that that might have been either like a little standalone hunting tower or possibly a little solar tower with a small great hall off it, but that had been more or less the limit of discussions previous. Anyway, we found out during investigations in the summer of 2006 that the reason the landowner couldn't find anything solid to build off is because essentially he was cutting his trenches through the fill of a moat. And we excavated that moat throughout June, then into October, and then finally December of 2006. And essentially we found that it was 4.5 meters deep from the original ground level. It was 7.5 meters wide with a vertical drop on the exterior. It was all cut through solid bedrock, and then we traced it for about 16 meters. We could see the outer edge of it, but we didn't know exactly where it went in either direction. We just knew that we got something really seriously impressive, and it was full of goodies, lots and lots and lots of finds, including huge amounts of animal bone, and it was the quite posh stuff as well, including lots of deer bones, which is a sign of incredibly high status medieval living. But also there was lots of datable pottery in there, and all of that aligned, broadly speaking, on the 16th and early 17th century. There was a nice silver coin from 1588, and we found evidence that basically the whole thing had been filled when the hall or the castle had burnt down somewhere around 1600, and they'd literally backfilled it right up to ground level, and then we'd come along and excavated it. So that's a very brief idea of what we did in 2006, but that kind of set up the story for a phone conversation that I had with Chris in the summer of last year.
So part of my role on the program really is I'm involved in finding the sites that we excavate on the Great British Dig, and sometimes I'm not given loads of time to do that. And sometimes there's lots of competing things that need to sort of fit to make a site right for the program. And sometimes it can be a struggle to align all of those things to do the right work in the right place with the right story. And so in a very mild panic, I rang up James, who suggested this site really. So in many ways, we've got James not only to thank for all of the work that's been done there previously and helping us to understand it, but we've got him for helping me find this site in the first place. But in terms of really reasons, I think why it was such a good site for the Great British Dig, it ticks a lot of boxes for us in terms of there was building on the work that James had done. As James described, really, there was still lots that off the back of that work we didn't know about the shape of the castle, the extent of the castle, and also just exactly what happened with that enormous moat that there's a great picture of James stood in the bottom of, and actually dwarfed by the scale of that medieval feature. But so in terms of that, really, what I'm always trying to do when looking at sites for the Great British Dig is to go to places where there's a need for archaeology to be done, and the archaeology that we can do within the scope of the show. And then also it's just such a good story to have the person that built the castle and built the church buried there to go and look at, as James did with Hugh in the show, that kind of thing. So it's not just a case of they did this in the past. We've actually got the name of the person involved and his physical sort of appearance there in the church itself. So there's a really good story which is told in the show, but also a great site with really interesting questions that we can hopefully and did a little bit answer within the show as well. And it's just cool, isn't it, looking for a hidden castle?
It is really cool.
Am I right in saying it's your second castle that you've found on the Great British Dig now? Because you had West Derby with Rachel's.
Oh,
Swallow.
yeah. I mean, yeah, I think we probably knew a little bit more about where sort of West Derby was a little bit better defined, actually, almost. So in a sense, yeah, slightly obviously different castle a bit, but it's, yes, our second castle site on the show, yeah.
But also with sorry. I was going to just say with West Derby, there was like loads of clues and hints to there being a castle. Castle Street, Castle, I don't know.
Castle Site Road.
Castle and everything.
That really gave it away.
But not here though, not in Strelley.
Not in Strelley.
Yeah. I think one of the, I suppose you might say, successes of the show was the fact that the excavations in 2006 had been quite limited. It really was just that hole that I've just described that was sort of 4.5 meters deep but 7.5 wide. I can't remember exactly how big the trench was that we opened in terms of the length of the thing, but that is all we saw. We just had one slot through the moat, and everything else was sort of a bit more ephemeral. We knew that there was a tower, and then there was the thoughts that there might have been that second tower underneath the car park in that second basement. But otherwise, we didn't really have a lot to go on. It was all a little bit circumstantial. It was kind of filling in the gaps. So the opportunity to come back, however many years later, can't do the maths offhand, I'm sure somebody else can do it, was golden, really, because I don't think there would have been many circumstances where we would have got to have opened trenches on that site again. It's difficult to foresee any further developments that might have occurred in the right locations. So it was just the perfect opportunity to do a piece of what you might call research for research's sake, but that comes with the remit of a golden opportunity to then broadcast that to a very wide audience as well, and hopefully try and in some sense put Strelley on the map as no longer a lost castle, but a castle that we can actually be pretty firm about. Now we do know some of its extents, which previously we were able to guess at, but the archaeology of the show really helped us to, I would say, 100% pin down on at least two sides.
Yeah, I should have said as well, the main reason, of course, is that James had already drawn a draft plan and given a lecture about this site. So the opportunity to actually put him on the spot and test him on national television just was one that couldn't really be missed. And for me, it doesn't matter, I couldn't lose really. If he's wrong, brilliant TV. And if he's right, fair enough.
Yeah, there was that sort of Chris and I had a lot of very long phone conversations, and also went to site about a month before the excavation, had a look round. And it all came down to the fact that I said to him, I'm pretty sure that there will be a moat here on the south side. And I'm pretty sure that if you were to cut a trench across the car park, you'll find the back wall and possibly even a moat on that side as well. And those were sort of the two things that kept coming back and back and back again. And when we actually did find those two things, Chris just looked at me and said, "You're unbearable." I tried to maintain a certain sense of modesty, I do confess. But I think Chris did secretly want me to be wrong.
Well, I think it just would have worked either way, really. For me.
Well, thank goodness you were right, James, because it was a great episode. It really was. I actually had a comment via YouTube from Steve. Thanks for your comment, Steve. And he actually said, never considered the idea of Strelley having a medieval history before, even less a Strelley family castle. And he only lives 20 minutes away. So
okay.
Interest. It's a shame we didn't know about the dig, Steve. You're always on our lives. You could have come along. That would have been cool.
It is quite a popular site locally. And I think it helps that since we did the excavations in 2006, the landowners have developed the old 18th century stables into quite a nice cafe. So it's quite well visited. There's some boutique shops there, that kind of thing. It's used as a wedding venue and for other events too. So it is quite popular. And because it's just on the very outskirts of Nottingham, it has quite a big demography that can visit it, and lots of people do. So lots of people are familiar and aware with the site in the way that just 3 or 4 miles across the landscape there's another mid-14th century castle at Greasley, which is actually much better preserved above ground, but nobody knows about that one or visits it because it's private and it's not often open, although they have been having a pop-up cafe there during the summer months, so it's starting to get a bit more notoriety. But it's when I talk about the two sites, which I do because I've done work on both of them, people often look at me when I talk about Greasley with a sense of sort of mystery because they don't quite understand where it is or what it is. But Strelley, they're always like, oh yeah, we know that one because there's a cafe there. So but it does have a popularity. People do visit the site.
Nice cafe as well, which I found out about I think after 3 or 4 days, and I was like, it's been here the whole time. Nice teas, nice coffees, nice hot chocolates, and there was a sweet shop there. They had a sweet shop and some a few other little stalls. Lovely, just check it out if you're ever in the area. So Marcus, how was the process for you actually? How much information did you have to create your reconstruction?
Well, I didn't have the information about the cafe, so that didn't go in. So we don't have a cafe at the castle. I had James's excellent PowerPoint presentation, which had a lot of dotted lines on and potential features. And James and I had a few Zoom calls or phone calls, and basically started to work up some ideas, and then waited for the archaeology to back up his interpretation, which was good. Yeah, fingers crossed, because I'd sort of gone full on. I was like, right, James is right, that's it, we're gonna, if he's not, I can always delete stuff, I suppose. Just be a tower. A tower and an oak tree. We started to put the walls in place, and then we were just chatting, and then we started to think, okay, well, let's put the buildings in, and we talked about where the hall was going to go, then where the chapel was going to go, and then it just sort of kind of all fell into place from there, really. You just sort of like, once you sort of know where certain bits of it are likely to be, you can sort of flesh it out. And we took a chance on knowing which way it was facing, because we didn't have the evidence of the moat yet, but the evidence from the moat actually bore that out. So that's really good. We know where the front and the back is. We've got the two towers on on opposite corners, and then put the curtain wall around and then fill it up. It was sort of the sort of buildings that you would have within that courtyard space. And it just came together rather nicely, actually. I thought it was quite neat. Yeah,
we used a couple of parallels, didn't we?
We did, yeah. We did
to base it on. So I'd been looking at Acton Burnell in Shropshire for quite a long time.
That's right, near Wales, isn't it?
A little bit earlier. It's maybe about 50 or possibly even 60 years earlier than Strelley, but the basic format of square towers in the corners with curtain walls and buildings ranged around.
Yes.
That worked. Also, some of the window tracery that we found in the previous excavation was quite similar to some of the tracery at Acton Burnell. It's just at the other end of the window that particular type of window mouldings were carved. And then I think also we looked at Baddesley Clinton as well, didn't we? Which is again slightly later.
Yeah. I think I built the Shropshire one as a rough model as a working starting point for us, and then we sort of expanded from there.
And we also used the basic ground plan, which is known at Maxstowe, which of course Hugh and I did the offsite at, with the Great Hall directly opposite the gatehouse, and that.
Yeah, and then the half timber stuff as well. We rather than just being all stonework. We
sort of mashed up 3 or 4 different sites, I suppose. So we've also got, I mentioned it before, but we've also got Greasley 3 or 4 miles across the landscape, which also has that kind of corner tower and buildings ranged between them situation going on as well. So it's sort of using buildings of the period and sort of looking at them in relationship to the archaeology on the site and trying to fill in those gaps, really. But it was a good one to work on. I was really pleased with what you came up with. I thought it looked great.
They put sound effects on this one as well. I heard.
Yeah.
You can hear the moat being dug, and then the grinding of stone on stone as the towers rise from the ground.
I'm gonna have to rewatch it.
Yeah, it's like kind of like a
Yeah.
swashy sound of the moat being dug.
You have to
I
rewatch
hadn't
that.
heard that before, but
Okay.
yeah.
No, it's cool. I think they have done it on one other episode. They've done sound effects, but I can't
Oh, did
remember.
they?
which one.
Oh.
I think they have. Or was it just this one? Maybe it was just this one.
Don't know.
Kind of like a
first
Minecraft.
one I've noticed it on.
Oh, so maybe it was just this one.
Yeah.
That would be the sound would be. What's the name of the studio? I'll come back to it. But Mikey Mike. I've forgotten the name of his studio. But anyway, that's down to them. They're amazing soundies that work on the music score for the show, and actually happen to work on it whilst we're filming as well. I don't know how to pronounce it. It's like RYGEN, right? Rygen. I don't know. Anyway, they're great. John Henry, you didn't really do any. You were quite lucky that week because it was like a machine dug trench. So how was that process for you? And it was pretty rubbish weather, so I think you had the short straw, the long straw, the short. What's the good straw?
A series of massive trenches throughout John Henry's Great British Dig career so far.
That was
them all by hand, and I won't hear any view on that. It was good. It was good at the start. I remember with the I can't remember his name, but the guy from the Member of Public. That I dug with at the start. That was nice. And I think it kind of like digging the big moat trench. That seemed to come in like two little brief moments of madness, I guess. But that's probably because of the rain, I suppose, because we got rained off for so long. But I kind of remember the start, and then suddenly we were going just so deep. But it was good, and it was really cool watching it back and seeing. You could almost see the sort of charcoal layer better on the telly than I could at the time. I don't know why, but yeah, it was really interesting to watch that back and actually see, what we'd actually sort of achieve. I think the episodes, obviously, when you're doing them all in a row, they sort of blur into one a little bit. So it's nice to sort of sit back and be like, oh, that is cool what we did, and finding the actual evidence for the moat. And yeah, it was great. Thoroughly enjoyed it.
I think that was our last dig as well that we did whilst filming. So that's even more harder. Sometimes it does definitely blur into one. But that trench was great, and you did really good pointing, and you explained the stratigraphy as well. I think you did well.
Yeah, thank you very much.
It was great visually to actually see the different layers and people to understand what the hell we go on about.
When I was sort of watching the start of that scene back on the television, I thought, oh, there's no way they're going to make this stratigraphy seem interesting. And then sure enough, they did. I thought, well, this is quite a good little sequence about the stratigraphy. So, helps that it was such good, nice
delivered with such charisma. That was what did it.
Well,
it's never an easy thing, is it, to make a little bit of brown earth next to a slightly browner bit of brown earth seem especially exciting. But I think if you can do it, it's a great skill. But I think also, how many people can honestly say that they've looked into a formerly lost castle moat for the first time? There's always going to be some level of excitement there, isn't there?
Yeah. It was really cool. It was really enjoyable to watch it back, and to find it in the first place. It was such a nice little story, And I don't think, again, like watching it back, you learn more than when you're in the moment. I think because they've had time to Chris has painstakingly gone through it and made sure the story all makes sense and stuff. So you end up watching it back, and I couldn't actually recall hearing about the fire when we were there at the time. Yeah. So then I was like, oh yeah, that's so interesting. So it was good.
Yeah, the discovery of the demolition in that original 2006 trench, it took a while to sort of piece together what exactly we were looking at, but there was just lots and lots of tip lines of material all coming down from the house side, and it was really clear to see as you went down that there was just separate events of just pushing things in, and it was just so full of building material, and there was brick in there, there was stone slates in there was lots and lots of smashed up bits of ashlar masonry, bits of window tracery, bits of doors. It was all in there. They'd literally just pushed everything in. But right down at the bottom, maybe about a foot off the bottom of the trench, was about something like a 30 centimetre, slightly, maybe even 35, 40 centimetre layer of just solid charcoal. That's all it was. There really wasn't anything else in there at all. And the only thing that I could really suggest that might have created that was a catastrophic fire. Because even if it's a stone building, which it probably was, or a masonry building, there's still going to be a huge amount of timber framing within it. It's going to have the floor frames and floorboards. There's going to possibly be internal timber framing on the exterior, and of course the roof frame as well, and cross frames to divide up the rooms. So even though masonry buildings you might think of as all being brick or all being stone, actually they still have a huge component of timber, and it's that which we found in 2006, and which we found really the ghost of. We found less of it in that southern garden trench, but it was there. So whatever had happened, it had probably happened on the west side of the castle, but it was still affecting some of the infrastructure and some of the buildings on the south side, for us to still be able to see that that charcoal layer. It was a lot less deep, but nevertheless it was there.
Interesting.
I'm getting some comments coming in actually, so I'll quickly just go through them. Where did it go? Oh, okay, so actually I want to know this one first, because I didn't know this, so thank you for your comment, Nigel. So Nigel was just saying it would be good to have the Great British Dig. He actually said dog, which I find even funny. The Great British Dig in Nottinghamshire village of Trowell, if there was any archaeology there. There's a village called Trowell.
There is.
There's the motorway services called Trowell, which is the archaeologists' motorway services of choice.
I love it. And yeah, even then Steve comment, yeah, behind the trowel in Trowell. That'll be quite funny.
Well, I actually left on Strelley at Strelley, so if anyone, if anyone comes across that.
I rebuilt, I used to work as a stonemason, and I rebuilt a water tower, a stone traceried water tower at Strelley Hall. So I've done a little bit of work in that village. That was a 19th century structure. It was a good one. Spent a whole summer doing it.
That'd be so cool to go back. I can already imagine like Hugh's voiceover. All the puns. So we actually have another comment here from Beadle Home, who said, interestingly, Google Maps shows a rectangular moat-like water feature just down the road in the crook of the bend. Has that been eliminated as having no historical significance?
So there is another moated site at Strelley, and this time, unlike the one where we dug, it does actually have water in it as well, and still holds water. It's on slightly different geology. And this question always comes up whenever I lecture about Strelley. There's a real fascination about it. It's one of those little rectangular moated sites. It has water around it, and it's got a little fish pond off to one side. There's never been any research done on it, but it is completely covered in trees, so it would be a real nightmare. You couldn't do any geophysics on it. It would be almost impossible to dig, and to be honest with you, a lot of the archaeology is possibly trashed by those tree roots as well. But looking at it in the context of the village and the site further up the hill, there's a good chance that it's probably the original manorial enclosure for the Strelley family, and that they at some indeterminate point have moved up the hill to possibly be closer to the parish church. It's difficult to sort of think what else it could be, but equally it could be a garden feature. It could be we think of it as a moat with a fish pond off it, but it could all just be a fish pond with an island in it. And we do have other sites a bit like that in Nottinghamshire too. There's one at a place called Aslockton, which is often referred to as a castle, but I'm not completely convinced on that site. I think it's actually garden features for a hall, so it could be that. It's just a really difficult site to pin down, both to date it but also to give a function to it. But traditionally it has been thought of as possibly an early version of the Strelley's lordly dwelling, but whether or not that's the case I honestly can't prove, because it's never been excavated.
From the sounds of it, it never will. That sounds quite a difficult one. Yeah, but it's really cool. And then we had, oh, hey Rosie. Rosie's from our Bogner episode, so you'll be seeing her on TV on Thursday, and then repeated on Saturday, and then you can watch it anytime for free on Channel 4. So Rosie said, what post excavation research has been undertaken? I'm not sure how far they are. Any updates, Chris? Do you know?
Yeah. So obviously, I say this every week, but all of our work on the Great British Dig follows archaeological best practice, which includes post-excavation reporting. So actually, the report for Strelley has just recently been completed, and that is sent to the local historic environment record, and they have a copy of that so that it is publicly accessible, and it goes into the wider sort of database of archaeological information that informs future research and things like that. So actually that report's just been finalized, which includes all of the finds from the work that we did, and all of the recording of the trenches, and to an extent an interpretation of all of that work, which then obviously informs any future research really on this site, but also some of the sites, adds to the sort of canon of information that James was talking about in terms of other sites in the local area as well. So yeah, it's actually all been done, literally just finished off there recently now.
Has, if you can remember, is anything from, post excavation, did they find anything during finds processing that we didn't identify? I mean, Hannah goes through everything anyway.
Yeah. So a lot, actually, to be honest, the best stuff in terms of the most interesting sort of small finds were pretty much covered in the programme. We found one of the things that sticks out, that the prunt, that was the little piece of applied decorative glass that was talked about in the programme. There's some lovely, there are parallels in terms of the types of vessel that would have come from, and that's very much as sort of described in the programme, but they're really the best and most closely resembling examples that exist in museum collections are really, really close in date to the sort of the building and use of the castle. So actually that finds a lovely sort of item that could genuinely have originated in the hands of the Strelleys, because it was very much the best, as I say, the best examples right in around that date for Samson de Strelley. So that's a nice thing. And again, similar for the bell, the small bell that we looked at in the programme, again, right in and around the date for Samson de Strelley himself. So again, could very much have existed in and around himself. So I know that so most particularly those things, I think those were probably the most interesting and really evocative finds that we had, and the post excavation has shown that the dating of those right in that point that we're most interested in.
That's true, actually, just to alliterate as well. So a lot of finds are identified on site by Hannah or David, who are find specialists. Link to their website is in the description below if you need that services. But obviously sometimes when you're doing everything on site, you might miss something. So that's the only reason why I asked, not discrediting them or anything. Sometimes further analysis, further time to actually research the artifacts in detail can sometimes give more. So that's why. And actually that bell was so cool. That was cool. They found it near was it a deposit ceiling? Yeah, it was a deposit on top of a part of the wall that was found, right? If I remember correctly. We were all there actually, weren't we? I think was it raining? Probably was raining.
When was it not raining? Just picking up on that idea of the post-excavation analysis. When we looked at the original finds from 2006, even then, when I actually did what you might call an assessment rather than a full analysis of the stone work that came up on site, there was one piece which I'd actually thought was later 13th century, which it's only really latterly when I've looked at it again in really the last 5 or 6 years that I've actually realized that it comes from the period of Samson de Strelley as well. So even in a published report, which I wrote in 2009, there can still be errors of judgment in there. You just go with what the best evidence you have at that time and period is, and with the best will in the world, I've had a lot more experience of historic stone recording since then, so I've been able to sort of refine that a little bit. And I'm sure to most people they'll be thinking, well, what's the difference? It's about 50 or 60 years, but actually it's a completely different style of stonemasonry, and it obviously helps to date the building as well, because there's always been this one piece of stone that I thought, well, why is there a bit of 13th century stone hanging around here? It never really made sense in terms of the rest of the story, but a deeper analysis of that piece of stone and looking at parallels for it showed that actually it did come from the Strelley house. So that extra amount of time to process and to think about and to go to deeper analysis is absolutely crucial to the archaeological process to make sure that we get it as close as possible.
100%. John Henry, let's ask you some questions. Sitting quietly over there in the corner. So you watched the show as well, and as you said earlier, watching it back kind of made you appreciate and remember a lot of the excavations itself. So what was your favorite moment watching it back?
My favorite moment watching it back,
Other than the memes you were making online.
I don't remember these memes. I don't consider myself a meme creator, so this is news to me. Do you mean the picture of me holding the rod? It's a good picture. That was in the official press pack.
Actually, you're right. It was, wasn't it?
That's not like one of my,
you're right. That is
photos.
That is true. So while we're on there, they have to take photos of us. They send for the press release, and that is one of the photos that's sent in like this little package. And I think you can actually see it on Channel 4 if you were to Google it. There's a way of seeing it online.
Just me holding a giant rod, and why wouldn't I be?
You were making jokes about digging the trench. That's what it was. I'm sure it was this episode. I get confused. It was this episode.
That's on my personal Facebook page, Tash.
Oh, sorry.
We don't share those jokes in the
pub. No. And actually, talking about trenches, Rosie did ask earlier which trench was deeper. Was it John Henry's Moat Trench at Strelley or Tash's Cellar Trench at Strelley Hall?
Oh, I don't think the cellar trench. That's literally just a cellar, isn't it? I don't think we can count that. That's not really it's definitely mine.
I think they were pretty. They were pretty close, I reckon. But I think John Henry might pip you, Tash.
Yeah.
I think.
Did we didn't bottom it though, did we? Or we did? Did we bottom the moat? I'm having a mind blank.
Well, we caught the we didn't know it. where the trench was right at the edge of the moat, really. So I think there would have been, had we been able to get closer to the building, I think we'd have found potentially that it was, that it carried on down and got deeper before it then came up the other side.
So was it just over 2 meters, John Henry's trench?
I think so. Yeah.
Because on the western side, it was 4.5 meters down. It probably wasn't that deep on the south side, but it was 4.5 from the original ground level, which was pretty much the same level as we were on that terrace where John was digging. From that level, it was 4.5 meters to the bedrock at the bottom of the moat. So they really went for it. The point, though, I think, is that as well as digging a physical barrier, which would have acted as a social division as well as a means of security, and to be really impressive to say, we are here, you are now crossing into our enclosure. They can also use the bedrock that they were digging up. That would have been a quarry, because the stonework that does survive at the very, very footings of the hall is exactly the same petrology as the stuff that comes out of the moat as well. So that they actually use it as a ready-made quarry, and they take it out of the moat and use it in the construction of the masonry as well. So an entirely practical solution to architecture, because of course you're not dragging stone dozens of miles across the landscape, which does happen, but you don't want to pay the expense of transportation. So if you've got a source of stone locally, then you can just go for it. But we found that there wasn't actually bedrock visible in John Henry's trench. It was just dug through softer earth. So I suspect they would have had to have gone down a lot deeper before they hit that bedrock.
I can't remember. Did that one have a bit of, they didn't have any demolition rubble in there, did they? Or anything to pack it up compared to the trench that we were digging?
No, not in. It wasn't not in the same way. But I think interestingly, is like James was saying, that the layer of ash in John Henry's trench was not nearly as thick and deep as had been found in the moat at the other side of the castle. But that in itself, I think, the programme can only go into so much kind of detail about some of the archaeology that we found. But that was a lovely bit of detail, really, I think, describing the end of the castle, where most of it had gone into the great big hole available at the front, and less of the sort of material and rubbish and the clearance of that impressive building had ended up in the smaller and somewhat less impressive moat. Not to do down John Henry's trench, of course, it was excellent, and he dug it all himself with that spade. But it was clear that, you know, it had been cleared in to an extent anyway, in one principal direction into the main moat at the front of the castle, or at least that's the suggestion from the evidence that we've got. So it's lovely in a way to start, I think, to pick away at the story of the end of that building and why it's not obvious in the landscape now, even though James and Hugh explored parts of it that survive within the building. Kind of nice to get a little bit of a moment in time sort of thing of what happened to the building and how it was cleared at the end of its life.
I think the fact that we got that really deep layer of charcoal to the west, and there was all of that building material in that particular moat trench from 2006, probably suggests that the fire might have been localized to the West Range as well, and that it didn't spread past the tower, which still mostly survives, onto the southern range, and that would probably account for the fact that there was less demolition or hardly any demolition rubble in the southern section of the moat as well. It was probably a pretty catastrophic fire, don't get me wrong. You wouldn't want to have been living there when it happened. It would have been an absolute disaster for the family, but it was at least somewhat localized. And then the family kind of muddled on through the rest of the, well, for about half of the 17th century before they were really having trouble. And I spoke about this with Hugh during the programme, that they divided the estate 5 different ways, and they were rowing with each other, but they were also rowing with their cousins at Woollerton Hall, which is the next manor over. They were intermarried with them, but they were both early coal miners. Lots of early examples of coal mining, medieval coal mining in Strelley and Woollerton. And they were rowing with each other about rights to particular mining areas, but also they've been accusing each other of trying to deliberately flood the other's mines as well. So there's all of this sort of legal behavior going on, and it must have been horrible at Christmas. You know, you can imagine them all sat round, and Christmas is a horrible time anyway, but imagine them all just sat round hating each other because of coal mining rights and inheritance rights. And in the end, they've got so little money left that they have to basically pay off their legal bills by giving the estate to their lawyer, because they've got no cash left to give him. So they give him the estate. And you can imagine this lawyer sort of pitching up and looking round at this, what was probably quite dilapidated, old-fashioned 14th century castle that's also half burnt down, and thinking, well, what am I going to do with this then? You know, probably happy to take the income from the rents of the tenants, etc., and maybe some of the coal mining as well. But it was probably quite a ramshackle environment to have thought about living in. And then that happens in the second half of the 17th century. And then maybe 100, 130 years later, the descendant of one of those lawyers thinks enough is enough and just takes the whole site away, gets rid of pretty much everything apart from the base of one tower and a bit of that tower that we filmed in, and starts again and builds that quite grand small mansion house. That's kind of the end of the story. And I have to say, I'm really interested in that aftermath of castles. Why don't they look like they do when they were built? What is the story? What is the human impact? Kind of what leads to the demolition or partial destruction of these places is becoming a real sort of research priority of mine. I've really been getting into that with a lot of different sites. But you know, as my learned colleague Chris Scott says, that it was good that we got the opportunity to tell that story, both from the known history, but also from the archaeology as well.
Mm.
Marcus, if you're good at animation, maybe you could like animate this story. I mean, you got pictures of, you got cows, right? You could do it with cows. And like have the cows talking and saying, you know, dividing the land up, make a visualization of this. It's a great story.
The cows are going to tell the story.
Yeah, why not? The cows could be the Strelley.
The lawyers and their leveling of the house.
We've gone quite off piste here, haven't we? Towards Marcus just animating the entire show, putting all the rest of us out of a job.
But just replace all the presenters with cows, apparently.
Yeah. I think with
maybe
more
the odd bull. Of course.
with more time and budget, there might have been the nice idea of the castle when it sort of rose out in your animation. You can sort of then imagine it
We could burn it
crackling
down.
away on fire, and then that would have been quite a good one,
That
wouldn't
would
it?
be cool.
Yeah,
I think the land separates.
simulations. We could actually set fire to that in the computer and watch it burn.
You just want to watch the world burn, don't you, Marcus?
Only the one I built.
Okay, cool. Sorry, because you were going to say something earlier.
No, it's completely gone. No.
Nothing to do with cows.
No.
Cattle in general.
In which case we don't get so we don't care.
Curiosity, actually, Marcus, I can't remember for this episode. Did you get to do any reconstructions of artifacts?
No, I'd like to have a crack at that glass, but I think
That'd be
it
cool.
might be quite complicated. But yeah, I'd like to have a go at that. Yeah.
He had a real job on building an entire castle
Oh, well,
in
you know.
3 days.
Fortunately, we put in quite a few hours before, hadn't we? With sort of various
Yeah, we've done some
meetings and
research. Yeah.
lots of
Spoil the
emails.
magic. Don't spoil the magic.
Well, I tend not to turn up with nothing.
It's just
because
half a day of Marcus'
that
time.
would not work. That would not work. You know, if you turn up with nothing, you can't, you know. I've got a sandbox of Roman bits and pieces that I can put together for the Roman stuff. Not the pottery and stuff. We have to do that. Although I did all that lovely pottery at in Newcastle at the Hadrian's Wall, and none of it was shown. Did the indented beaker? I did the guitar, and none of it made it into the show. So, you know, I was proud.
Blood, sweat, and tears.
It happens to the best of us. You know, I was cut quite a bit from this week's episode, actually. So, you know, they even cut the presenters. Can you believe it?
Yeah. Hours and hours of you talking about 18th century landscape and deposits. I don't know why they didn't put that in.
A whole other episode, that one.
Yeah.
To be fair, you got to talk about the bell when we have a community day, which is the last day of filming. And the last day of the show and the last segment of the TV show that we all see. And John Henry did get to talk about the bell, which is quite cool.
Is that in the episode though?
Is it not in the episode?
No, that's what I'm talking about.
Oh.
Thanks for the reminder.
It did. I have video evidence. I have video evidence.
Yeah.
I did not make it.
I didn't make it, unfortunately. The bit of you doing the little dance at the end made it in though. So yeah, I'll remember to do more dances next series.
The dance, yeah, that was fun. That was fun. But yeah, wait. So what? Oh, actually, yeah. There's the rain scene. I remember now. The one scene that John Henry and I have, I think, throughout the whole show, and you saw it in the most recent episode, when it was raining.
Yeah. Well, I come across quite well better in that scene than I did in real life, because in real life I was just saying, "You have fun digging. I'm going to go sit inside."
Yeah, I don't want to be here right now.
They cut that bit out, so I'm glad for that.
Yeah, they actually, you can see it's a couple of different bits that kind of pieced together there to make it cohesive. But no, it was good fun. And you know what, the rain, actually, it was great food. One time we had jacket potatoes. I remember that. That was when it was really raining it down. Jacket potatoes, and we were all so excited.
We had the end of series party, didn't we? So
yeah, we did. Yeah, a bit of karaoke.
Yeah.
We were all present for that. Yes, we were. I'm trying to think. Yes, we all were. I remember now.
Well, present.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got a photograph of the only photograph I took that entire night, and it's of me, Chloe, and Marcus, and we all look distinctly unfocused.
I've got a selfie of us together that night. Actually, I have to send you it.
Oh, great!
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
that'd be
yeah.
nice. Yeah.
I'm
What-
sure
what
I
did-
have photos.
What did we sing, Tash? What song did we do?
Some was it Elvis Presley we
It
sang?
was indeed. We did Suspicious Minds together.
Oh yeah.
Tore the
Calling
house
it
down.
I'm like a backing dancer. like,
Dancing again. She's always dancing.
But no, John Henry was great. Great singer. You should sing more. Yeah. Grace
No.
Taylor flicks
No.
her hair around. Yeah.
Marcus nailed it. Marcus with his
Marcus
his
was
poem impressions.
amazing. Marcus was amazing as well. You two could like sing a song. We should get you to sing a song next time
I don't
on the
know,
series at the end.
maybe not.
A duo. And we'll play the instruments in the background. I'll just like, yeah. James, I don't think James, you didn't sing.
No.
You didn't. Chris,
This is-
you didn't sing.
No.
Nobody
No.
wants that. Nobody wants that.
No. We were at the back discussing great and learned things.
Yeah.
About how you were right, maybe. And thank God.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it was more just a sense of relief, because there was, you know, a sense that we had to get this one right, that we couldn't have a sort of a program where there was maybe less that turned up, and certainly, you know, I've worked on archaeological programs before where that has been the case, where it hasn't necessarily turned up the goods. So there was a real pressure on. You know, I've kind of sold this site to Chris, and you know, I was just really pleased that things had turned out all right. So there was just a sense of weary relief by that Saturday evening, that I'd kind of, you should never go into a piece of archaeology as a prediction, because you literally never know what you're going to find. But to have presented all of the arguments for what we might find, and to say there's a reasonably good chance that we will find this, and then to actually find that, and in many respects a bit more, like the bell or the prunt, or some really nice green glazed pottery, etc. That was all, you know, a jazzy bonus for me, really. But just the idea that we were looking for a moat here, we were looking for a wall here, and those two turned up. But that was just a moment for the shoulders to finally unclench, and yeah. So Chris and I were just gamely supping a few pints at the back and grinning at each other.
I think I was probably telling you about the scene that Audrey, the producer, and I had planned, that if that hadn't happened, for the great scene of going, so James, where's this castle then?
Yeah. The end of my archaeological career scene, you mean?
Yeah.
You can pinpoint the moment where it all came tumbling in, like Strelley Hall did into the moat.
I was sad we didn't get to film that, really.
Yeah, well, we could have mocked it up. We could have mocked it up where I was wearing a dunce's cap and something like that. We could have gone for that.
Yeah.
I mean, we were a bit worried, weren't we, about with the car park trench at some point. I remember that took a while. That took a while to have something structural pop out, or just anything in general. It was made round and natural.
Yeah, that wall came up. We started digging at one end of that trench, and the wall came up right at the other end. So yeah, there was a bit of a mild panic.
And there wasn't. It didn't go down that deep, did it? It was literally the lower foundations of the wall, and then straight onto natural. So if the 18th century landscapers had been a bit more diligent and taken 2 or 3 courses further down, we wouldn't have spotted that at all. So we did, in a sense, get lucky.
So you could have argued, James, in that scene that was not made, that's what happened. It was just the landscaping.
Well, this would have been a repeat of what happened during the Coventry episode in the series before, where we went looking for a moated site and couldn't find a moat. So Don O'Mara and I basically had to sit down and explain to everyone why there wasn't a moat there, which I think we did convincingly well. And I think between the two of us, we came up with an idea, and then Don filmed it, and it was all to do with the movement of water through the landscape, and the fact that we were probably looking at a watercourse rather than a moat. But you know, I would not have relished the opportunity to have a similar conversation on a site which I had basically sold to Chris Scott. Yeah.
But
That would have
thank
been
goodness you did, because
tough
it was a
moment.
really cool site, really cool.
Yeah.
And going into the basement as well,
Yeah,
we got
that's
to
good.
go down.
Yeah.
So cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So cool.
So you hear of sites that have got secret passages, and that's something I write and lecture about quite a bit as well. But here there genuinely is an underground tunnel. It's a proper one. I mean, it is an 18th century one, and it helps to link those two tower basements, the two 14th century tower basements, because they used the kind of the known example of the tower, which is underneath the castle room. They used that as the entrance to a whole suite of beer and wine and storage cellars, which all interconnect in the perfectly normal way that you would expect in a 18th century mansion house. But then there's this really weird long tunnel, which is about 30 meters in length, and it throws a right, and then you come into this very different environment with that beautiful chamfered doorway, and the steps plunge down into this sort of rock cut chamber. It's really atmospheric down there. And basically what they've done is thought, well, we've got that tower basement now, we've got another one over there, we've got these cellars. Well, if we link them, then we can use that. They probably used it as a cold store, or maybe an ice house, something like that. And it was a service access, this tunnel, and they wouldn't have burrowed through the ground. They would have literally just cut a dirty great trench, vaulted it over, and then put the earth back on top of it, and then it's used as a perfectly regular service passage. But when you're down there, it's all quite spooky, and it's quite atmospheric, and there's lots of water because it was throwing it down. So Hugh and I were wading through quite substantially deep puddles, and it was a great experience being down there. It was also an opportunity, because it was raining so much and we were sat around waiting for filming scenes, that I could take my camera down there just on my own and spend a bit of time down there trying to get some decent shots for lectures and publications. But just being in that space on my own was quite an atmospheric experience too.
Which reminds me of me running through the tunnels. I thought I was going to get locked in, and I was so scared. Sasha and I are at the end of the day. But James, actually, I got to go on a tour with James, and it was so cool. And it didn't feel spooky at all. It felt so calm, so chilled. And then I went by myself, and then Sasha came along, and I got completely spooked out. But yeah, and I think they do ghost tours there, don't they?
They do, but ghosts don't exist, so
No, but you can still have some fun there. You can get spooked out, there's no lights.
I can't remember. Marcus and John, did you go down there as well, or I can't quite remember, because I went down there with so many different people. Yeah, so you both got.
Then my parents came on the last day.
Yeah.
So I took them down there and turned the lights off. My mum she's watched. She normally watches these. So and I turned the lights off, and she was not impressed.
You rapscallion.
No, it was cool down there. It's very cool.
Yeah.
The doorway that you talk about that's in the episode, that was very impressive.
Yeah, that would have been, I think, the ground level door from probably a range of buildings up against the curtain wall into the ground floor of the tower, which would have been more or less at the level of the car park. There's not very much ground between that footing of the door and the car park above. It's only probably about 3 foot, something like that. There's not a lot below. So that would have been how they would have accessed the ground story of the tower, which presumably would have gone up 2 or 3 stories as well, using parallels and everything. Then of course it's got that basement as well. So if it didn't have the basement, we wouldn't know about it. It would have all been swept away. So it's a site that I think, so little of it does survive that it's remarkable that we can tell as detailed a story as we can from the bits of surviving archaeology. Chris and I had a conversation not so very long ago where we were sort of discussing could we have put the car park trench a bit further to the south and found another tower possibly? And both have sort of been beating each other up about that one, because yes, we probably could have done.
That would have been cool.
A slight lost opportunity there, wasn't it, Chris?
Maybe a little bit. I had like 5
Clever.
programs on. you know.
Yeah. But the fact that neither of us thought of it, and we just went for a wall instead, but that was probably enough. There was enough stress and pressure on us. A wall that's achievable, but to have found the whole tower, that might have just made our very stressed heads explode.
But then John Henry would have had to dig it all out with his spade.
Oh yeah, I mean, I would have done it.
He would have done it. He would have done it.
He would have
He
done
would
it.
have.
It's no big deal.
Yeah, no, that's true.
Quite deep with a basement as well, wouldn't it?
Yeah, assuming it did have a basement. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it could still be there for future archaeologists to have a go at if they can find some funding, but and argue the research case for it. Also the 4th tower, if there is a 4th tower, which I probably think there is, I do think it's a quadrangular site with corner towers. The 4th one would also potentially be accessible as well. It's under a bit of driveway around the back of the hall on the way down to the stable block. So potentially all 4 of those towers are in some sense accessible.
Nearer the cafe as well.
Yeah.
With
I
John's
never saw this cafe. I
literally saw it right at the end. I think I told you about it though when I found it.
never went. I tell you, I've missed out on these hot chocolates.
Right next to the cafe is another building which actually fronts onto the village street that I'm pretty sure is a medieval house as well. And I've never quite been able to satisfactorily explain what it's doing there. It could just be post-medieval. It's one of those sort of H-plan houses that would have services in one cross wing, a parlour and bedchamber in the other, and probably a hall between the two. And it survives at quite an impressive height as a stone structure. And then it's got later brickwork on top of that, and then even later brickwork on top of that. So there's quite a vertical stratigraphy with that. But that could be maybe 15th, 16th century, something like that. But it has occurred to me that someone as impressive and posh as Samson de Strelley is unlikely to have just had a single courtyard house. So the courtyard we found is about 30 by 45 meters. And I do suspect that there's a second courtyard which would front onto the street, which would have had things like an outer gatehouse, barns, granaries, maybe less posh lodgings, animal sheds, workshops, that kind of thing out there. That would be the normal late medieval layout for a courtyard quadrangular castle. And I do suspect there probably is something towards the village street, and that H-plan house might have been part of that outer enclosure. But obviously we had enough of a story to tell without going into James's strange theories that there might be even more to this lost castle.
It's another episode, James.
Yeah. Or we could just
You're hedging your bets now. Yeah, I was right about that.
Yeah.
Could be there again.
We'll have a sequel. The one where we do get to film the end of James's career.
Return to Strelley.
I'm there for that.
Doing tower laundry right now, yeah.
But of course, it would give you the opportunity, Marcus, to possibly add a second courtyard to the site.
Yeah, great. Yeah.
Marcus is up for this as well because he's already got half of it done.
Well, I'm afraid we've already gone over the 1 hour mark. So is there anything else that has to be covered before we wrap up the live stream for today? I think we have covered everything, haven't we? But
I've probably just got one, which is we sort of talked about it, but I think actually one of the nice, lovely things that we got out of this, which probably didn't really fully get an airing in the program, was the fact that because we were able to suggest a back to the castle and a front to the castle, that then placed it sort of and oriented it in the landscape. And even James and I have talked a little bit about this after the work and things like, and a little bit on site as well, and in that we can now sort of, and James has talked about it just now really as well, in that we can now suggest the direction from which the castle was approached even, That would have been past the church and all this sort of stuff. So really, I think although we got quite small trenches in quite specific locations, which gave us just little bits of the story, that then obviously grew through Marcus's digital paintbrush into a full castle and put then in the landscape. But then, of course, that bit, by dint of that building sitting there and the other things that we know that were around it, that actually gives you much more in terms of the experience of people, and the going past Samson's church towards Samson's castle is, and James talked about this in the episode, is a real statement of power and statement of kind of patronage and all that sort of stuff, which if we're not careful, James will talk about a lot.
All I was going to say was there's lots of parallels for that, passing a church before you get to the castle. It's there at Bolingbroke, it's there at Tattershall, it's there at Northallerton. It's a really common way of dealing with it. The only other thing I was going to very quickly say, my learned colleague, was that the axis of the medieval castle was very much east-west, going from the road past the church into the castle, and then beyond the sort of low-lying hill beyond, which was probably part of Samson's parkland for his deer herd. But the axis changed in the 18th century. So the main access into the site then becomes from the east. So you have this curving driveway, and then the main frontage, the posh frontage, looks to the south because it's got the warmest aspect, but also it looks out towards Nottingham and the roads in that direction. So by dint of this castle being pulled down, they get to change the whole way that the site is accessed and understood and presented. And I think we were also able to look at that, but we probably didn't have the opportunity to talk about on camera. But yeah, I think that's a really good observation of Chris's.
Honestly, I could just listen to James talk about castles all day. You make a podcast? I would love to listen to it. 101 with James. You can just do all of Nottingham. Nottinghamshire could be your thing. Give me more ideas.
I'm planning a podcast to go with my myth busting book next year. I'm going to have one podcast episode for each chapter.
Amazing.
As a little extra.
Can you do like an audiobook as well to your book?
I'd like to. I've put it to the publishers. I'm just waiting to find out if that's the case. Whether or not I've got the skills to actually read it is another matter entirely. John, did you have an audio book for yours for the search?
Yeah, I haven't done it yet, but there is going to be one.
But you're going to do it in your beautiful voice.
Yeah,
Great.
Of course. It's a memoir. So imagine, people often say to me, when people ask me, is there going to be an audio book? And I say yes, and they're like, who's going to read it then? And I'm like, well, obviously me. It's a memoir.
It's not always the case, though, is it? Quite a bit of Bill Bryson's stuff, which is obviously sort of travel logs, is read by an actor, but it's always best when he reads it himself. So I would, I know you've got much more of an actor's voice than I have. So
I don't know about that. But...
I can see how listening to you read your book would be a wonderful experience. Whether or not anyone wants to listen to me sort of stumbling over my words is another matter entirely, because I don't have those skills that you have.
No, don't be silly. You can find lost castles though, can't you? So
honestly, and James, in the comments, we've got a comment in from Beautiful Wild saying castles, bricks, enjoy listening to James. So there you go.
Thanks.
Well, I'm going to wrap up this live stream because we've gone over the 1 hour mark, and I know if we don't do it now, we're going to keep chatting, so I'm going to be strict. Marcus, anything else you want to say before we wrap up to tonight's episode? You okay with it?
Can we have some more castles on the next series, please?
Yes.
Some really big architecture. That's what we like. Yeah.
I like that idea. If you're watching this back, leave your thoughts and suggestions. If you have any suggestions, leave them in the comments. Let us know. Any lost castles? We want to hear about it. You can email me at behindthetrowel@gmail.com. Just put subject for Chris Scott. And I'll forward it to Chris Williams. So thank you all so much for tuning in. If you have any questions following this live stream or any future episodes, you can leave them in the comment section and we will answer them in the next live stream, which will be on Tuesday, where we will have special guest Michaela, who will be featuring on the Bogner episode. So thank you all for tuning in. See you on Thursday over on More4 at 9 p.m. and it's free to catch up anytime. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time. Bye.